Both of you refused to accept responsibility throughout the trial and still here today, which makes my job a lot easier. And instead of apologizing today, because you never have said you're sorry, but what you did do was put on one of the most reprehensible, narcissistic defenses that I have ever seen in my years of trial work. And may God have mercy on your souls, because this court will not. Please stand.
Blistering words from Judge Mary Claire Akers as Jeannie Whitefeather and Donald Lance were sentenced to decades in prison today, answering to their historic convictions last month of human trafficking and forced labor.
Now, this was a case that stemmed from the October 2023 discovery of two teens locked in a shed in Sissonville and revealed years of abuse and neglect of 4 of their adopted black children. Whitefeather was sentenced to a maximum of 215 years for human trafficking, forced child labor, civil rights violations, and child abuse and neglect. Her husband, Lance, was sentenced to 160 years max for similar charges. He was found not guilty on the civil rights violations and had fewer child abuse charges than Whitefeather. This was the first time in state history that human trafficking charges were ever brought on the state level.
Prosecutors were able to prove to a jury that Whitefeather and Lance brought 5 adopted black children to Sissonville in May of 2023 from Washington State, made them do manual labor, and neglected and abused them with physical punishment and a lack of basic necessities. This all while receiving adoption payments from the state of Minnesota. Kanawha County prosecutors holding a press conference this afternoon after securing the max sentence they were seeking.
I am so grateful for the opportunity to work with the children in this case. They are so wonderful, so smart, so funny. They are going to do amazing things in this world, and I'm so grateful to be a part of getting some semblance of justice for them after they...
Whitefeather and Lance have also been ordered to pay $280,000 each in restitution to the children.
And when Judge Mary Claire Akers handed down the sentence, it came with scathing remarks as she blasted Whitefeather and Lance for their treatment of the children and their inability to take responsibility.
Yes, and Anna Saunders, she joins us live now. And Anna, I mean, you were in that courtroom. What was it like when she handed down that sentence?
Well, Peyton, Gina, scathing is the right word for it. And it wasn't just Judge Akers who made her feelings known. The children victims in this case were there and faced Whitefeather and Lance. Once again, the oldest teen girl looked at Whitefeather and said, "I want you to know that you are a monster."
You brought these children to West Virginia, a place that I know is almost heaven, and you put them in hell. This court will now put you in yours. And may God have mercy on your souls, because this court will not. Please stand.
After presiding over 3 weeks of their trial, Judge Mary Claire Akers did not hold back when she had her chance to address Jeannie Whitefeather and Donald Lance before handing down the maximum sentence possible on all of their 31 counts. But before she did that, the kids in this case, the 4 victims and even the 5th child who was considered the favorite, all gave impact statements, both spoken and by letter.
And while they don't bear physical scars, it is exactly right what said and the state said, that they will bear the psychological scars of what was done to them by you, Jeannie Whitefeather, and you, Donald Lance, for the rest of their lives.
The children, who we did not film, all detailed the years of abuse and labor and what impact it has had on them today, both psychologically and emotionally. The oldest teen girl even asked the judge if Whitefeather and Lance could be forced to stand with their hands on their heads throughout the hearing, similar to how Whitefeather and Lance would have the kids stand all day when they lived in Sissonville. The judge denied that request, noting the irony that it would be considered cruel and unusual for her to ask the defendants to do that in court, even though it was done to the kids in their home. Judge Akers instead opted to keep the pictures of them up as they spoke.
They all said today that they're still afraid of what will happen to them if they upset someone.
The kids all talked about how their lives are better now, but they will never be the same. At one point, the teen girl looked at White Feather and said, "You are the actual definition of a monster," and said that they were not just physically abused, but full out tortured. When given the chance to address the court, typically a time for apologies, Lance only said that he loved the children. White Feather said that she'd made mistakes, but never did anything to intentionally hurt them.
And instead of apologizing today, because you never have said you're sorry, even though, Miss Whitefeather, you say you made some mistakes, but you're not sorry for them. And Mr. Lance, I didn't hear you apologize either when you had the opportunity. But what you did do was put on one of the most reprehensible, narcissistic defenses that I have ever seen in my years of trial work.
Defense attorney Mark Plants, who represents White Feather, said throughout the trial and even now she still denies any criminal responsibility.
My client's side of the story hasn't changed. It really has been that they did the best they could under the circumstances and they didn't intentionally harm anybody. So I'm not surprised that they spoke their hearts, even though a lot of people disagree with it. That's their story, and that's what they've told.
The children also thanked everyone who got them out of their situation, the neighbors, the deputies, the prosecutors, and now the judge. Judge Akers, in her remarks, also commending the Sissonville neighbors who repeatedly reported White Feather and Lance in Sissonville for months before their arrests. She called that the one good thing in this case.
But the good in this is the people that took action here in the state of West Virginia. The good in this is that now these children are West Virginia's children and not your children.
Now, both White Feather and Lance brought forward motions for new trials today. Those were denied. White Feather's attorney Mark Plants did indicate today that they will be appealing their convictions. Live in the studio, Anna Saunders, Eyewitness News.
Lance and White Feather kept motion-activated Arlo cameras on the children, one in the shed on the 14-year-old boy and 16-year-old girl, and one in a room upstairs with no bed, only a tarp floor that stayed on the 9-year-old girl and 11-year-old boy. The video showed a daily routine of waking up early and being forced to stand with hands on head, unable to change or shower, receiving only peanut butter sandwiches to eat before going back to bed on the floor. In the shed, the teens used a camper toilet, holding a sheet up for each other to shield the other from the camera. Lieutenant Piles said she first began hearing about this in August before the shed discovery, but testified could never quite get a hold of a CPS worker to follow up.
There was a contact made with a worker once, but there was no further contact to coordinate going and making a visit to the residence together.
The jury saw days of video the Arlo cameras saved, including the moments deputies busted in the door on the shed on October 2nd.
You're okay.
The children were turned over to Child Protective Services, and when Lance and White Feather got back with two of the children that night, they were later arrested. But that was just the beginning of their charges and the investigation. On Friday, the jury got an inside look at White Feather's cell phone. This included text messages between she and Lance where they referred to the kids as monkeys and pigs. Often Lance would describe physical punishment where he said he, quote, knocked one of them. We saw one text where Lance said, quote, somebody didn't say thank you, and his sandwiches disappeared. We also saw more video from White Feather's phone from their time in Washington that also showed yelling and physical abuse from Lance. A finance expert from the West Virginia Fusion Center, Alyssa Ledbetter, also took the stand on Friday. She broke down the adoption payments White Feather and Lance received from Minnesota. She said in total of what they analyzed from 2019 to 2023, the two received about $318,000 in adoption support payments, but she testified this didn't tell the whole story.
Well, the assistance began in June of 2018, and I only had from June of 2019 to November of 2023. So altogether, we're missing about 18 months.
All of this leading up to the most harrowing testimony so far on Friday afternoon from someone who lived it. We are not allowed to film or record the victims who will testify in this case, but we're in the room as the teen girl, now 18, but 16 at the time, shared what her life was like both in Washington State and in Sissonville. She said life progressively got worse with White Feather and Lance once they moved to the ranch in Washington in 2019. This is when the outdoor labor began, she said, and the physical punishments that included hits from a PVC pipe. While under a child services investigation there in Washington, eventually they moved to Sissonville, but she did not know why. She talked about how CBS was called soon after they arrived in West Virginia, and she detailed a visit from a worker who stayed on the porch and talked to them through the screen door. The teen testified she was not honest with CPS because Lance could hear her from where she was standing. Eventually, she and her teen brother, who has several mental health disorders, were locked in a shed in August of 2023. She said she went without a shower for 2 months and never changed clothes. She went from sleeping on a mattress to the floor with a sleeping bag. Her brother slept on the concrete floor with only cardboard at his head. She said she was forced to be his babysitter, but testified he was never the dangerous, violent kid that Lance and Whitefeather made him out to be. She recalled the use of physical violence, pepper spray, and racial slurs from Lance and Whitefeather. She recalled also being scared when police arrived at the shed, worried that she would say something to upset Whitefeather. Some of her more emotional moments came during cross-examination by Whitefeather's attorney, Mark Plants. At one point, he referred to Whitefeather as her mother, and she quickly corrected him. He questioned why some of her interviews before this contradicted what she said on the stand, but when Tuck asked her why she felt comfortable telling the truth now, she said, "Because I know I won't have to go back to that."